Do I seem calm? More relaxed? Or perhaps just much more pasty than I was the last time you saw this video? I just got back from a little vacation to visit my family in Scotland, and man, I had a good time. I feel better, but I ran into so many bad interfaces while I was traveling. So it's going to bring me vindication to redesign some of these, starting with the British Airways mobile app. I used this probably 20-30 times, trying to figure out my flight details, get my boarding pass, check in, do the whole finagle, and man, it introduced so much pain to my travels. I just need to fix it. So here we have the old UI with just a lot of white text on a semi-transparent background with an image behind it. Really hard for me to read or really know what's important to me here. The boarding pass itself is obviously quite standard, and I don't think we'll be changing that very much. But man, there's just so much potential to really leverage the homepage in a way that it presents the relevant information to me first, and then I can dive deeper into different parts of the application when it makes sense to me. So gonna take a stab at redesigning that. As always, here is our lovely little style guide using all of the blues and reds and a couple of the blacks from the existing site. I'm gonna tweak them and use them to build this new interface. In terms of typography, they're using Roboto for everything, and they were using a custom header font. So I'm just using a pairing Roboto and a title called Jost, a title font called Jost, which is like a very kind of playful modern font. People, when they're traveling, they don't want to, I would imagine, take things too seriously. So having kind of a reassuring, warm font helps to kind of hit home the message that they're going to get to their destination safely. Here we've got our user stories as usual. What do I really want to do with this app? I want to view my upcoming flight details. That's probably the most pressing thing for me, because when I'm on the go, I'm at customs. I don't want to be finicking around with the app. I want to go straight to where I want to go straight to get my details from the application to show it to the security guy. I may want to make changes to an upcoming flight, or in rarer occasions, I want to find a new flight for an upcoming trip, or track flights from my friends and family, and then view relevant advertisements when it's a good idea for me, meaning it's a really good deal to a location that I'm clearly interested in visiting. So, gonna take a stab at getting this sorted, and it might take me a while. Got quite a few screens to get through here, but rest assured, I'm going to keep you posted on my design decisions as I go, as always, and I will touch base in a couple hours. Hang in there. As I'm putting together this little travel advisory for COVID, I want to stress that I've never actually done a dark mode design on this channel, so I wanted to do it this time around. And dark mode is typically much more challenging to design because usually you use large saturated colors to draw attention, but in a dark mode app, the whole thing is usually some shade of gray or black, a dark shade. So you don't get to use that advantage anymore. So instead you have to use lots of different hues of grays to move people's attention around the flow, and then of course big saturated white blocks if you want to pull direct attention. So figured it'd be an interesting challenge. I'm gonna give it a go in this app here. As you can probably tell, one of the biggest wins that you can immediately apply to most mobile applications that haven't really had a lot of user experience oversight is moving the navigation from the upper left pull-out menu to something that exists in the footer close to your thumb. That's generally considered best practice these days. There's really no reason to deviate from it unless you're trying to solve some very specific design problem. But for this circumstance, the footer navigation works quite well.
Draws. I don't mind if you don't listen that much.
When I first open an application like this, I want it to immediately show any sort of upcoming or current flight that I'm ready to board, because that's kind of the most urgent use case for this application. So having it front and center on the homepage is just kind of a no-brainer here.
My mama always told me I was destined for greatness, but my mama also she told me take care of the kids and everybody around the world that can't fight for it. So it's a kuna matata, beast on the water, pray to provider, please don't divide us. Keep that and try to face your intruder to be someone brighter. Yeah, all in mind if you don't listen that much. Some of y'all don't listen at all. Same shit they be pushing your buttons. Got a grown man having withdrawals. I don't mind if you don't listen that much. Though I just mind what you say for the crowd. Cause some of y'all don't listen at all. Some of y'all don't answer that call.
Now I do want user attention to flow towards this upcoming flight block, but we've already got this COVID notice that's taking up a huge amount of the user's attention, given that it's very highly contrasted with the background being saturated white. So we're not going to reuse the same pattern, and instead we're going to use the nice subtle light gray that we're using for the navigation footer as a background for this container as well, to kind of indicate to the user that this is still important, but it's not, so demanding of their attention that it's ultimately distracting and confusing for them. Something that felt missing from the current UI is just some kind of status tracker for the flight that I'm currently trying to board. If I open the application, I want to see front and center, hey, here's all the details about this flight, but also here's the status. Is it delayed at all? What time should I be aiming to arrive at certain checkpoints to make sure I'm there on time? This is something that can be easily displayed to the user through a little bit of arithmetic, so figured why not just show this front and center in this same container. Now that we've got kind of the primary consideration out of the way for the homepage, there's now room to do some additional stuff that might make sense on a homepage, like showing the user a flight that's upcoming that they might be interested in buying based on their previous purchase history. This to me seemed like a really cool thing to put on the homepage. It's a good way to meld both the needs of the business and the needs of the user without being totally overwhelming, but of course making sure that this is displayed after the upcoming flight block was really important. Here you can see I'm again struggling to figure out what to do with the header of this mobile application. And that's really because I'm not very thinking through kind of the total use case of this application. Like, what do users actually want to do? And ultimately, they just want to check the status of their flights and all that, right? But they also probably want to look up new flights and kind of schedule some travel. So ultimately, I do arrive at the conclusion that the header should just be a means to search for new flights. But just right now, I want to leave this in, and I'll maybe cut a little bit away, just to show people that, like, oftentimes you kind of go down a rabbit hole in design that's not necessarily the correct design conclusion, and it just takes more iteration and just stepping back and looking at your design in the abstract to realize that you've made a mistake, and then ultimately apply some corrective treatments. This is a common pattern that I like to employ on mobile UX, where if you're trying to display a potentially infinite list of items to a user that neatly fit inside two categories, just allow them to swap between the categories right at the top in a pseudo-secondary navigation, so they can kind of just switch contexts. There's a lot of affordance for this pattern in the iOS design suite, so people kind of understand, generally speaking, that that control works in that manner. But for here, we've got your flights and tracked flights that may or may not be your flights. And we're switching between the two different perspectives, but they're both still lists of flights, so, you know, semantically everything kind of makes sense, and we have a lot of heuristics backing up the natural flow of information here in this page. And trying to really get inside the head of the user, from the perspective of your own flight, you're thinking about the destination and the departure location. But from the perspective of tracking someone else's flight, you're thinking about the flight number, because that's what they gave you so that you could track their flight. So ordering them, or excuse me, not ordering them, listing them by their flight number in the tracked flight option made a lot of sense, I would imagine, from the user's perspective. And then, of course, having a little inline dialogue to tell users whether or not that flight is still on track was useful, because people that are trying to pick up someone from the airport might want to know that information. I really like this design pattern for mobile. You see it a lot in apps like DoorDash, where there is a parent selection, for instance, searching for food, but then there's a secondary set of categories beneath that, where within food you might have burgers or Italian or some other kind of, cuisine option. So whenever you're doing that on mobile, a horizontal scroller like this, that with a really simple identifying icon and sometimes and hopefully always accompanying label, is like such a great, neat way to solve the problem. And then, of course, generally speaking, whenever you have a list of settings, it's usually considered best practice rather, to group them into categories so that they're much easier to navigate. It's really difficult for a user to scavenge through a list of hundreds of potential settings when you could, in theory, just group them for them and save them a bunch of headaches. Man, I cannot tell you the number of headaches that could have been avoided if this was the UI I was dealing with when I was traveling to the UK recently. Just all things considered, I think this kind of solves the user problems much better than the existing UI. It's just everything that I think is most relevant to the users presented on a home screen experience. There is a quick way for me to look through the flights that I'm booked for, or potentially check in on flights I'm tracking. I can explore new interesting flights that might be relevant to me, and then I can of course tweak my settings as needed. So I think this does a better job, but I don't know, you be the judge. Here we go, we've got the old experience with just lots of text on the screen, lots of confusing information hierarchy in my opinion. Big image background here is kind of hard to navigate. And now we have the new UI with everything I think that we could possibly need from this particular experience, positioned in a way that makes sense to the user. So once again, I appreciate you guys hanging out with me and sitting through this slog of a redesign. If you have any thoughts on what you'd like to see me redesign in the next episode, now that I'm back stateside, I will have some more time to do that. So go ahead and pop it in a comment, and I'll see if I can get to it in the next one. But we just hit 100 subscribers. I'm stoked on that. Thank you for all the support, guys. Gonna keep on churning these out every week, and yeah, just becoming a better designer every week, and I hope you're getting something from it as well. Take care, folks, and have a wonderful week.